Hello dear friends, today is the 23rd of June, Monday, and right now I'm reading the latest information from the agencies. Iran has launched a missile strike on American bases in the Middle East. Iranian missiles are aimed at the Al-Udeid airbase in Qatar. At the same time, air defense systems were activated at the Ain al-Assad airbase in Iraq. Shortly after Qatar closed its airspace, explosions were heard above the Dakos. The White House stated that it was closely monitoring the potential threats of the Al-Udeid airbase in Qatar. The headquarters of the Central Command Headquarters of the United States are located at the base, as well as the British military service. In recent weeks, many aircraft have been relocated from this base. Let me explain the meaning of this. Al-Udeid is the largest American base in the Middle East region. It is there, as I just told you, that the Central Command Headquarters are located. The headquarters planned, and then the headquarters carried out an operation to carry out bombing strikes by B-2 bombers on nuclear facilities in Iran. Primarily in Fordow, this base is well fortified, but, as you probably heard, immediately after the American strike on Fordow, the head of the Joint Committee of Headquarters, General Keynes, said that the main threat is to ensure the safety of our bases. About 40,000 American military personnel are located at the bases. Even though the Al-Udeid base is strengthened and has the most primary attention, it is necessary to believe that the Iranians will strike, as the analysts believed, on the eve of the attack on the American bases in Iraq, where they are much less protected from the air. Well, in general, what we expected has begun, although yesterday and today in the morning, many analysts carefully assumed that Iran is now in such a situation that it does not have time to retaliate, and the most important thing for them is to preserve the regime to survive. As you can see, this is not quite the case. Iran is not going to just leave, and its leadership with the political arena. Pay attention to the fact that these strikes were carried out after the visit of the foreign minister of Iran to Russia, where, embarrassed looking at the table or the floor, Putin murmured something about the fact that the Americans and Israelis had committed an unprovoked attack on Iran. To which there is no justification. This is said by the leader, the head of the aggressor country, that is being carried out now. And tonight, the next barbaric shelling of Ukrainian peaceful cities, the second, is to express in this way his condemnation of the actions of the United States and Israel, and promising, first of all, military assistance, some other assistance, but nothing was said directly about military support. Nevertheless, what followed this blow is evidence that the Iranian leadership heard about serious support in the Kremlin somewhere. Why serious? Because Iran is still in isolation. That is, the analysts yesterday evening noted the reaction of China. To North Korea to be silent at all. Russia is such a very foggy reaction to the bombing of Ford. They noted that Iran is lonely and now its leadership will have to think only about survival. Not quite. Today we will discuss with you the situation that happened after, as the defense minister of the United States and President Trump said, A brilliant blow unbeaten in the history of mankind by the most powerful armed forces. Now we will consider with you what happened as a result of the situation. The B-52 strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities really helped the White House and the administration to solve a number of serious PR problems. I pay attention to this first of all. Well, first of all, something like that, at least for a while. I pay attention to the appearance of the name of Trump in Epstein's files. You know this story, you've heard it. Well, we expected that it could start to turn, and now it's a hit, and somehow this topic has been moved to the background. Also, for a while, I pay attention to the history of Sergio Górez. A man with changing surnames who is not known where he was born. He is silent about this as a partisan, and it is not known where his people disappeared. Also, President Trump, after this successful blow, as he called it, demanded immediate acceptance in Congress of what is called a big beautiful bill, that is, by law from the budget of the United States, where instead of reducing expenses, as he promised to his voters, it was probably the main point of his pre-election campaign. These expenses are inflated, in my opinion. There is something there for $2.4 trillion. This is what so far, in any case, it was possible to solve. Well, another important transaction is taking place. On the eve of this blow, such a theory was strengthened, and such a meme, remember, about a chicken that always shivers at the last moment. Now another meme is being blown up. Trump's doctrine, the boy said, the boy did, let's see what happens next. And then the situation develops in a very bad way, gentlemen. The option that I warned about when we analyzed it, the Israelis and Americans will strike. They will not strike, pluses and minuses. I told you then that if you already make such strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities, where, as expected, Iran is being done, simple and necessary manipulation for the production of nuclear weapons. It is necessary to strike for sure, to destroy the object for sure, and to have proof that it has been destroyed. Otherwise, a situation is created that may be worse than it was before these strikes were made. I would like to remind you of the situation that was here in the 90s after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and now I will remind you again, because this is the second time we are in the most difficult situation, in which the enemy is extracting and will extract the maximum profit, and we are in danger, in a serious danger. So let me remind you, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, here Clinton immediately removed the military threat, reduced the financing of the VPK enterprise. The American bases were closed, all the tanks were taken out of there, all the objects were thrown. In short, the first and only superpower. Why arm ourselves? At that time, the FBI was fighting with the terrible Russian mafia on Brighton Beach, which diluted gasoline with water, and the most terrible enemies were considered the Russian mafia and money laundering, but in private, the American high-ranking military, colonels, generals whom I was familiar with, said that the most terrible threat was the threat of the possibility of the spread of nuclear weapons from the territory of the Soviet Union. We don't care, they said, about the mafia, about everything else. We don't even care about the threat of nuclear weapons from the side of Russia if it arises. We will bomb it to pieces, and that's it. It is dangerous for us if nuclear weapons from Russia are in the hands of unknown terrorists. In this way, nuclear terrorism can begin when it is unknown who uses this nuclear weapon. Then we came across the talks that in the Soviet Union there were portable nuclear weapons, almost RANs. General Lebedь from the landing, who was, at some point, the Secretary of the Security Council. A man with a brutal face and a brutal voice, but a real military paratrooper. So he said that he knew for sure that there were such portable nuclear devices. And the Americans, before that, no one said whether they were there or not. They were lost in their guesses, tortured, did not sleep at night from this threat. And then once a man said that he knew, he was immediately caught, brought to the United States. He was accepted here as the Crown Prince. I remember a live broadcast from the Congress where he sits. Senators, congressmen communicate with him as the future president of Russia. They ask, and how are we going to do this, and how are we going to regulate this? And he sits so happy, give me full power. That was the situation, gentlemen. Panic was terrible. Then it all fell apart. Apparently they realized that this nuclear weapon did not fall apart. Apparently the Yeltsin administration managed to carry out an event and to recalculate. And now back to what we have now. That completely destroyed Iran's nuclear program as a result of the strikes that had taken place. So far, there are still two people here, President Trump and the so-called defense minister of the United States. In fact, there is the former Virtuhai, who later became an employee of the entertaining Sunday program on Fox News, where he played the role of a military man, Mr. Hexit. Virtuhai was based in Guantanamo. These two only said to the person that everything is in the dust forever. But let's say the chairman of the Committee of the Chiefs of Staff, General Kane, at the first press conference the next day after the blow, when he told how it all happened. On the question, do we have the confidence that it is destroyed, he said, we need time, we need to see. Because the visual assessment based on which Trump and Hexit made their statements does not say anything in this case. And then, with every hour, the number of people and serious people not associated with show business began to increase. And the anxiety notes in statements from Israel, from the United States, from Europe, their number also began to grow. What do we have now? We have satellite images, which were taken a few days before the crash. And there you can see a whole column of trucks. I counted a good, gorgeous picture in high resolution. I counted about 20 of these trucks. That is, there was a serious evacuation. We also have a statement of the deputy head of the Russian National Security Council, Medvedev. In general, he is such a comic character. We all know that, right? We don't even know what state he is in when different kinds of statements and opuses of the epistolary genre appear from his name in the Telegram channel, first of all. But this is all, so to speak, the second. It doesn't matter. What matters is that many sometimes call them the Putin bear. That is, it is such a monster with two heads. The Putin bear and Putin, and the first has in the language what one has in mind, that is to put it simply, this image of the Putin bear is a channel for the implementation of important, active events, reporting important information to, first of all, the head of state government of foreign states. He says what the official head of state cannot say for various reasons. Medvedev stated that there was an evacuation of this object. Well, under evacuation, if you understand now, evacuation is both centrifuges and at least 400 kilograms of enriched uranium up to 60%. By the way, he did not say anything about it. No, he was called, I do not remember his last name, a representative of Iran. And there were no comments, no refusals from the Iranian leadership after that day. He also said that we evacuated Iran from the corresponding objects. Then he says this to the bears and says that now it is after the blow. He did it literally right away, that is, the next day after the blow. And now this program will continue, and now it can be said for sure that it will end with the creation of nuclear weapons. He did not say where this uranium is now, these centrifuges, and who will create it, but the following situation arises. That is, the day before, about 10 days before the evacuation, before the blow, at least 5 Chinese military transport aircraft landed in Iran. What did they do there? No one knows. The second, Iran has a dry land border with the Russian Federation. They say there is a railway line, although I don't know about it, but they write, and there is a message on Kaspi, and we have a precedent for Russia. The precedent is always important. They have a modus operandi worked out. There is a whole set of rules on what and how to do in case of crisis situations. Evacuation. I told you how Primakov personally evacuated Iran. It was Iraq then, Saddam Hussein. And maybe he evacuated that weapon, or an example of this weapon, or traces of this weapon, of mass destruction, which the Americans and their special services did not find in Iraq when they bombed the Iranian armed forces and hanged Saddam Hussein. That is, we mean the statement of the Iraqi representative that it was evacuated. Then, I would say, the impudent, provocative statement, which he could not do. I do not know again whether he was conscious when this piece appeared. These are responsible people, according to the instructions of the higher officials of the state. They wrote this in order to inform the public. And here is the situation, gentlemen, that has happened. That is, an unprecedented threat has arisen by and large. The threat of nuclear weapons in any form. I think most likely we are talking about the portative tactical. And maybe even less tactical nuclear warheads that will be created. In fact, this follows the statement of Medvedev. And then they will be in the hands of the unknown to us. That is, nuclear weapons arise in the hands of the unknown. And nuclear weapons, that is, if there is a nuclear explosion, as experts say, it is always possible to determine where it comes from. What it is, so to speak, what its origin is. That is, there is a danger that some terrorist groups or such organizations as the Guard Corps or their representatives, then Al-Udeid and their various satellites, can use nuclear weapons and hide identity, or hide the identity of those who will use it. That is, this is a weapon, a nuclear weapon under a foreign flag by and large, and this changes the catastrophic situation because it breaks the entire deterrence system. What is the so-called deterrence based on? Well, let's take Russia, let's say Russia. the Russian leadership understands in any way that if it uses a nuclear weapon, it will be known that Russia has used it at the moment, and in response, the enemy side can and must apply, according to any doctrine, nuclear doctrine of any nuclear country, a counterattack. And it is the fighting spirit of this counterattack that prevents Russia, in this case which we are talking about, from the first aggressive blow. But if the owner of nuclear weapons is unknown, and in his hands he has nuclear weapons under a foreign flag of another country, which he may not have any relationship with, then he can apply it. And what to do then? Then there is a situation like 9/11 when an action was carried out and no one knows who did it, who is behind this. Bin Laden for this organization. They began to look for a state and they came up with the idea that Iraq is behind this. Saddam Hussein, they just came up with it. There was no direct evidence on the contrary. But here there is such a situation when it can be applied, and the one who applies it is not afraid of a counterattack because he will be unknown. And this breaks the whole system of restraint which still existed. Some of the most radical analysts, I would say, in these conditions assume that maybe this was the idea of those who came to mind. The idea is to apply these blows to Ford and other objects. That is, the idea is to create a foundation for a situation. When the current administration of the United States will have to fight for the fact that there will be no world war, especially nuclear. And for this, it may be necessary, that is, a situation can be created when we will have to introduce an emergency situation all over the country. And therefore, the next presidential elections may not take place under this pretext. This will not be so easy to do, because even during the Second World War, elections were held in the United States, on which Roosevelt won the last elections. Soon after that he died, but always sooner or later something new appears. Therefore, the question is why these blows were really applied at the end of the day. Because, I repeat, if you make a blow, you have to invent the object in which you are going to destroy those materials. If not, they are not known where, not known in whose hands, and this is a terrible situation. When they were lying there in the front, the Iranians were working there. They knew who they were dealing with whom they could talk, in general, in relation to whom they could apply some measures. But now this is a big question. Russian Federation suddenly appeared in the face of Medvedev, an official face, so the United States first of all. NATO, all NATO, must wake up and understand that Medvedev's piss was an act of blackmail, by and large. So, in the style of the mafia, here's what I have now, and keep in mind, build your behavior in the appropriate way. And this is happening against the background, when here such impressions are not understood. Here's Rubio, the Secretary of State of the United States. Sunday is coming. The program, in my opinion, faced the nation. He is asked where, what's wrong with uranium. He's jostling something there, forcing it, and so on. Everything is right, jostling, everything is fine, but he doesn't want to answer this question. He again has a direct question. What's wrong with uranium? Well, I think he's still lying there. Although his president has already reported that everything is over, the problem has already been removed in general. He thinks he's lying there. Well, what are we going to do next? And then the Iranians, after being hit by him, the Iranians will get to him and give it to us. And we will pass it on to other countries, maybe or maybe we ourselves will turn it into a peaceful atom and use it for peaceful purposes. Maybe we will pass it on to Iran to use it for peaceful purposes, to get useful energy for humanity. That's such a childish naivety. Vance, Vice President of the United States, he was told he was paid attention to the statement of Medvedev. He did not understand. He says he is not going to do it. What a sacred simplicity, what a naivety. You know what amazes me? I am, as a person, a professional who came out of the Cold War. This is some kind of failure now between that elite military political, which was in the West. In particular, the United States of America and what is taking place now. What is taking place now is some kind of children's garden. Infantile and infantile who think like this. All this has been back a long time ago. The good old days were over when America was the only superpower to maintain this status. It didn't even need the armed forces. Everything was over. No, in what way? Once again, I'll repeat the thoughts. An atomic bomb has appeared in the world, with what happened, with what led to the bear. An Iranian bomb that is potentially in the hands of unidentified people, countries, or organizations. That is, the fears of the time of the collapse of the Soviet Union, which was then only vital, but very vital, I would say, and concern was the only and the biggest. Now they have become a reality. But it will have to pass for some time for the elites of the Western countries, including in Europe, to realize the fundamental coup that took place in the world's security for the past 24 hours. So what now? Now, Grossi, the head of the MAGOTER, says, well, now we have to wait until the Iranians go down there, carry out the inventory, and tell us the answer. And who told him that they would tell it? Then where is the trust that they will tell? Well, they will say, Iran is lying here. But that does not mean that they did not evacuate him really before the very blow. Or we will say, no, where is he? And we do not know where he is. It is unlikely that Iran will report to the Western community now, after this blow. There is uranium, there is no uranium, and so on. Hopefully, what representatives of Magate will let there, it is again necessary to bow to the Iranians who have just been bombed in this way. The operation is ground-based. Well, the ground operation should be accompanied by a change of regime. Netanyahu, in principle, is inclined to this. He believes that this is a must, such an exit for the root solution of the situation. Trump and, in general, the whole administration, for all the United States, for the base, the magic, for the base of social electoral Trump, this is a terrible dream. This goes against everything he promised. And he still firmly told when he was still reporting on the strike, he says that this is a one-time action, that's it, we will put an end to it. We sent the same, passed the message through an intermediary to the Iranian leader that this is not a war, and now let's proceed to the negotiations. But that's where I started today. The response of Iran to the American bases is, gentlemen, no invitation to peaceful negotiations. This is a challenge to war, to an absolute, wide-scale one. By the way, Trump emphasized this in his speech as a result of these bomb strikes. He said that either we finish the talks or we continue to bomb. And there are many targets there, and they are open, which may stir the economy of Iran from the face of the earth. But apparently there are other thoughts now. Now the question is, could these uranium reserves from Fordow be brought out unnoticed? For this reason, I listened to the speech of Colonel Shamish Breton Gordon, a British military chief. He was in charge of the regiment, which was engaged in chemical defense, bacteriological, and nuclear weapons, including radiation. He said, it's easy. You need containers with thick lead, protective walls, and that's it. There is no radiation now. He said it doesn't mean anything, even if uranium was enriched up to 60%, and even if it was hit close to him, something was damaged. Radiation on the object should not be visible now. That is, after a few days after the blow, absolutely no one knows what to do. How to do it and how to deal with it. That is, the blows are early now. This is actually a challenge to the United States. At home, it was possible to lay a bridge from a chicken to a taco, but the boy said the boy did it, but now what? The boy must continue to bomb, and then a ground operation is going on, and then there is a failure, because after the war, the Second World War, there was not a single case in the history of the United States when they started the war and won. That is, all the operations, what in Vietnam, what in Korea, what in Afghanistan, what in Iraq, the Americans did not lose a single battle, a particular battle during these wars. They won all the battles, but the wars in general were lost. Here is the result. Now, the attitude of other countries to what happened to the bombing. Well, first of all, let's start with those countries that are now bombed, the bases on which are now under Iranian shelling. Saudi Arabia and Qatar, I emphasize, condemned the shelling, stated that it was a violation of international law, an organization of the United Nations, and proposed to continue the military action and start negotiations and settle it all. This is exactly what we were talking about, gentlemen, that in such a situation it is possible to carry out the shelling. We must continue these Israeli airstrikes and carry out this operation, as it is called, the operation of exhaustion, the exhaustion of the enemy, bringing him to conditions before the negotiations. Before the negotiations to solve the problem with this ill-fated uranium. In fact, this is what they offer, and they are not just allies of the United States. I repeat, this is Saudi Arabia, this is Qatar, this is the United Arab Emirates. These are the main business partners that Trump visited not so long ago. He said that he brought trillions there. He put his personal business projects into billions there, and they told him the most important thing in their message was, as analysts and experts say, not to get there. With the change of regime should not be outside, because no matter how much they say now, 85% of the population of Iran is against the Ayatollah regime. Yes, they are against it. But now there is a unification of the world around the flag. They are against the Ayatollah regime, but they are even more against the change of the regime through the war, through the bombing of the same Tigran, so that this change of the regime would be carried out by Israel, together with the United States of America. This position was in the Middle East of the Allies. Now, as analysts note, China has reacted very modestly, very modestly. In North Korea as well, you've seen and heard about Russia, but Russia is such a thing that on the one hand, it's blinding, it's not provoking aggression, as Putin said. On the other hand, it didn't say specifically that we would help you, but a day before the statement of Medvedev himself, and then a few hours after the meeting in the Kremlin. He talks about what was behind the scenes of the talks in the Kremlin, and the West needs to be aware of this. First of all, the United States of America needs to be aware of this. First of all, the administration and President Trump need to be aware of this. I would like to tell you that after this successful blow, as they believed, by Iran's nuclear facilities, Trump is again throwing himself around Putin. It was absolutely crazy, and we must believe that there are people in Washington who understand this. Therefore, not by chance yesterday, when all in euphoria, representatives of the administration, the only channel here close to Trump, to this administration, Fox Channel with a haze, what an unprecedented operation in the history of humanity was carried out at this time by viewers and listeners. He speaks on television and says that about his bill, which he prepared by Senator Blumenthal, about the fact that we already have 84 Senate co-sponsors and we will accept this case, but he upset me and very strongly one phrase that followed. We will give Trump the right, he called it a waiver, that is, on the basis of Trump he can apply, use this law when it will be adopted. Or maybe not, that is, from the point of view of Graham, it is necessary to give as a weapon pressure to Trump, pressure on Putin. Although skeptics, critics, whom I treat, at least in the present moment, I believe that it is impossible to do so. Senators and also Graham for a long time against Iran's nuclear facilities resisted successfully. This is one of the directions of the attack of the White House on this bill. Right there, instead of the administration should, right there the administration can. That is a discretionary authority. Do you think you should apply the law? You don't think so? No. The administration said, we need it for flexibility. Well, it sounds in general so logical, but it all depends on what kind of administration it is. That is, does it really need flexibility in the pressure on the corresponding side? Or does it need an excuse not to do anything and just sit there somewhere under another carpet or a layer of carpets? Who is making the wound, by and large? His position, it must be said that it has changed compared to yesterday. After the meeting in the Kremlin, this position changed. Because the next day after the bombing, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Iran was in Turkey. In Turkey, he found an understanding from the point of view of international law. The UN Charter Turkey said that it would support Iran in its diplomatic efforts, peacekeeping efforts. And there was a press conference where Iran laid out its position, what it would do next. The position is to preserve the regime through diplomacy. And the foundation of this diplomacy must be the UN Charter, the organization itself, and, in particular, the nuclear arms deal. The minister made a line. It was an unprovoked attack by Israel and the United States of America. We did not provoke it in any way. This is a violation of the UN Charter. Therefore, Israel and America did not attack us, Iran. They attacked international law, the Organization of the United Nations, the UN Charter, and all other international legal documents. Therefore, the entire world community must now rise up and stand up for Iran. This is the position. And he emphasized a special role in this matter, the Treaty on the Unspread of Nuclear Weapons. That is, now they have hit on this, that is, what he hinted at, that now this weapon will appear. Probably, well, probably this will provoke other countries to acquire nuclear weapons. That is, this is a blow on the Treaty on the Unspread of Nuclear Weapons, and therefore the whole world should be on our side to judge. And when he said all this, I had the impression that in his head, somewhere in the middle, someone installed a steel, impenetrable stove. On the one hand, this stove in this compartment of his brain, it was what he was telling. And the other one at that time was asleep, and there they did not understand that what he is now, this minister accuses Iran, the United States, and Israel. The same thing was done. Against Ukraine, Russia, the closest ally of Iran, strategically, which helps her, including by supplying weapons. To commit these crimes in which he is now accusing Iran and, that is, the United States and Israel. This is such a cult. And then it all followed together with him moved to Moscow. This is a horse of Russian diplomat Lavrov, who uttered a phrase that the right to resistance or the right to self-defense. From the attack must be strictly based on the procedure of the organization. He meant that if you are attacked, you must not resist but call for. The meeting of the UN Security Council, and through it the majority should approve the right of the victim of aggression to resistance. Ukraine should not resist. But go to the UN Security Council and ask to make the appropriate decision, and since they're in Russia the right of the victim, then everyone is clear that is. Imagine how idiotic the attitude of the question is, and this is said by the head of the Russian Foreign Ministry. The same thing, by and large, Putin also said when he told this minister about the fact that the attack was not provoked by anything aggression. There is no excuse for this. And if there is an excuse for this, judge this Pupkin, judge who this Pupkin, who is now sitting, makes the same decision in what he is now accusing Israel and the United States, and that is absolutely, that is, they have reached to the marasmus now in this some kind of crazy. I just don't remember even in the Cold War. Such a schizophrenia it gives, reveals opportunities, additional opportunities for Ukrainian diplomacy. And it's time to act. Will act Iraq. Iran will act in his support Russia. Russia, the Kremlin. Ukraine must take over initiative because Iran raises. Essentially the question, but he is now on the side of the same aggressor who violated everything. Iran is now blaming Israel. The United States of America, well, underlining all this said today, there are too many events. All this is not enough on each of them. You can speak now. Ukraine. Ukraine, I see here in connection with the current situation additional chance for activity Ukrainian diplomacy in connection with the campaign of Iran. About an unfaithful victim in real, this victim is now one. This is Ukraine. Iran is not a victim. He is an accomplice aggressor, criminal international who committed aggression and continues to commit it, including the use of weapons made by Iran. So I'm sorry for the non-diplomatic statement. The Minister of Foreign Affairs, it would be better to shut up now in the world arena with his mind conclusions. Then the Lograms project is a good one, strong. Unfortunately, senators are forced to take a step back. It would be possible, of course, wait, because time will pass some time and administrators will see that they did again, sorry for expression, and with that blow about how they did it all and so on, and in relation to its consequences. And there will be no such euphoria in which Trump says that we have solved all the questions, and then if anything, we will break it down into pieces. The situation will change, and there will be an opportunity for the senator to turn the issue back and make it an imperative bill, a law. That is, the administration must do it, and not whether it wants it or not. But the question is all about time. If we have this time, and by and large I believe that even in this version that Graham said, even if the bill is adopted, and gives the president the right to use it discreetly in his own way, and then it will be better than if it is not adopted. That is, when it appears, it will still be possible to use it to pressure the administration. But here you have it. Why don't you use it? Why are you threatened in the face by some bear threatening you with terrible punishments and horrors? And you sit here and say, but they can't do it, they won't do it. Why don't you press them now? I think that this bill, even in its current form, will give such an opportunity. And finally, today I listened to another analyst, a globalist, in the sense that he evaluates the situation globally. As a rule, it is reasonable from his point of view in the near future, in general, for Ukraine, there should be a good session of the next NATO because there will be a decision on the selection for defense. This is 5%. This is sweet music in the ears of Trump. And this is good for Ukraine because the more they do not select, the more money they will get. It will go to the defense and defense capabilities of Ukraine. Well, and he is almost sure that in the current situation will continue to provide military assistance to Ukraine and intelligence. We need to do this because the United States and the West must understand that now, especially after the visit of the Iranian to the Kremlin and what began to be applied. By the most valuable, the largest airbase in the United States and vulnerable in Iraq, if we are to talk about it, who followed the visit to the Kremlin. This is a manifestation of the system. That is indeed the axis of evil works. Yesterday, the day before yesterday, they thought that Iran was one. No, he is not alone. Russia, China, North Korea are behind him, at the disposal of which, apparently, there are both Iranian centrifuges and this 400 kilograms or how much more or less enriched uranium, which is now working on what to do with it, in addition to the direction of their thoughts, not to turn it into a peaceful atom, then to do in order to cause the maximum inconvenience. For the Western countries and, above all, the United States of America, you need to be an idiot. Here in Washington, in order to think, you can just call Putin and talk well for half an hour or an hour and a half, and fix everything thanks to your oratorial abilities. This infantilism that I am telling you, I noticed the abyss, how much everything was sharpened for the national security of the United States before the end of the Cold War. And that infantilism that is still flourishing here in the present time. Nevertheless, dear friends, let me end this video here. Glory to Ukraine, to the armed forces. The enemy will be defeated, the victory will be ours. To you, dear friends, endurance, courage, and firm faith in our inevitable victory. See you soon.